Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Ask an Expert. Thank you so much for joining us. I see we've already got some friends from IKEA here. I see a few Hayes, hey from the Netherlands. I think I saw it from Scotland there. Welcome, everyone. Please feel free in the comments to tell us where you're joining from. And if you ask a question, we'll do our best to get to it a little bit later. Today, I'm really happy to welcome back IKEA Foundation CEO, Per Heggenes. Per, how are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you, Ryan. I'll just say hello, everyone, as well, and welcome back to Ask an Expert. We're coming up to June 20th, and June 20th is the World Refugee Day. So the IKEA Foundation has worked closely with UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, and many other partners for more than 10 years to help improve the lives of refugees around the world. So we thought it would be just appropriate for us to take the opportunity today to showcase one of our partners working tirelessly to improve the lives of refugees. So for over more than 85 years, I think, the International Rescue Committee has responded to the world's worst humanitarian crisis and has helped people whose lives and livelihoods have been impacted by conflict and disaster to survive and recover and gain control over their future. IRC works in more than 40 countries around the world, providing water and shelter, healthcare, education, and economic empowerment support to refugees and displaced people. And they've been a partner of us for quite a long time, and we also see them partnering on other programs that we do across the world. So my guest today is Barri Shorey. Barri is the Senior Director of Economic Recovery and Development at IRC. She's a 15-year veteran at IRC, is now based in New York, but has worked in many interesting countries around the world for IRC, helping refugees and displaced people. She works to ensure that people whose lives and livelihoods have been shattered by conflict or disaster have their most basic survival needs met and have the assets and income to prosper, which is what this is all about. Barri, welcome to Ask an Expert.
Thanks, Per.
So before we get started on our conversation, so let me try to set the context. So the world is experiencing a record level of forced displacement. More than 70 million people around the world have been forced to leave their homes, their belongings, their loved ones, in search of peace, freedom, prosperity, actually in search of just having a chance to live a normal life, which they can't do where they came from. So out of these 70 million, 26 million people have been forced to cross the border to another country due to conflict and persecution. That's when they're classified as refugees. Most of these 26 million refugees are not in Europe or the United States. They live under very challenging conditions in the neighboring countries where they fled from, some in rural areas, in refugee camps, and others in urban areas. So the majority of the world's refugees are hosted in sub-Saharan African countries, in Middle Eastern countries, and in Asia. Those are the countries where we work more closely with partners such as IRC to help improve the situation for people who have been forced to flee their countries. Now, people move all the time, and they're always done. Some for economic opportunities. Some are forced to move due to climate change-induced situations, droughts, floods, hurricanes. But today we will just focus on refugees, people who have been forcibly displaced. And let's not forget, nobody selected to become a refugee. They were forced to move, often simply to save their lives. So refugees are people just like you and me. Don't forget that. So Barri, what most refugees are longing for is a way to rebuild their livelihoods and live a normal life in a new country. And almost 80% of them are seeking these opportunities in urban areas. Yep. They're not in the typical refugee camps that we know so well from the media. That's what you're helping them to do. That's what you're doing in the Billy program, which we are part of. Tell us about your work to help refugees become self-reliant.
Great. Thanks again, Per, and the IKEA Foundation for the tireless commitment to support refugees around the world. I'm just so lucky to be doing the work that I do at IRC now more than ever. And I just want to recognize sort of my great privilege that I have to be able to be here with you guys and to give a voice to refugees and their experience from the safety of my own home in Brooklyn. And I'm going to do my very best today to make sure I lift up their stories and challenges, but super important, their resilience. So Per, I want to hone in on what you mentioned about around 80% of these refugees are in urban areas. I think we often have a myth of thinking about refugees in refugee camps, and at some point they'll be able to return home. But we know in 2018, less than 3% of refugees were able to go back to their countries of origin. Most, almost 78% or so, are in protracted situations, almost as long as 20 years. And so what we try and do at IRC, and the work that we're doing with you in the Billy Project with IKEA Foundation, is really ensure that we can support refugees to have the survival skills, the resources, access to jobs and income that they need to make new countries as safe, as protected, and where possible, really integrate and give back to the communities that they work in. We do this both by ensuring that refugees have, right when on their arrival or in the middle of emergency and crisis, they are able to at first meet their most basic needs. And a lot of this is through experience and lessons learned and research we've done. The best way to do this is to put cash in the hands of refugees and vulnerable populations so that they can go into their new countries, buy things in the market that they need, make dignified choices, and be able to sort of survive, pay rent, buy food. As the situation sort of more longer term and refugees can sort of start to, are safe and protected, we support, like in the Billy Project, refugees to find a job, whether that's self-employment or whether that's through existing employment opportunities, a lot in small and medium enterprises in the countries where they are, and provide them with the training, the resume building skills, the sort of employability and life skills that they need to be able to access new jobs in the markets that they're in, as well as where feasible, money to start a business, training to start a business, supporting business plan development, which is all what we do in the Billy Project.
It's fascinating, and I know it works. When we work with refugees as a foundation, we always make sure that we try to do the same for refugees as for host communities as we do for refugees, and to create that balance, because often you find that the host community population is equally poor and are not getting the support they need. And we want to create a collaboration between refugees and host community in order for the host community to welcome the refugees and create that harmony and ultimately get refugees integrated. So can you talk about how you integrate the host community when you work with refugees in urban areas?
Right. I think that's super important. We also know that, about 1/3 of refugees sort of are displaced in the least developed economies and countries. And so it's often that refugees are moving into situations where host communities themselves are vulnerable. And it's important to ensure sort of integration and acceptance and sort of social cohesion of refugees, that our programs are equally available to the host populations that serve them. And so the Billy Project is a good example of this. We've set up what we call livelihoods resource centers or job resource centers. And it's a place-based spot right now with the Billy Project. We have 2 centers in sort of Nairobi and a little bit outside of Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. And what we do is we allow sort of anyone to enter into the center, whether they're a refugee, host community member, internally displaced, whatever it be, and they receive a sort of intake form or fill out questions with one of our staff. And they're able to sort of pull out what are the services that they need, specifically, what are the skills that they used to have, are they part of the host community? If they're refugees, do they know about work permits and sort of legal issues there? And so we want to make sure that we provide these suite of services to all who are in need. And what that allows, this sort of space allows the refugees and host communities to work together, to take trainings together, potentially to start businesses together. And so we really want to ensure that an aim to sort of target at least, 50% of our programs are also available for host communities as well. It's really key to success.
Absolutely. So we're not going to get around talking about COVID, right? So,
of course not.
But given the slightly different impact that COVID has on communities in sub-Saharan Africa, at least yet, and based on what you said, I assume you had to shift some of your focus over the most pressing issues people are feeling as part of the pandemic. How have you been able to do that?
Yeah. Per, the first thing I want to sort of, or the thing I want to emphasize a bit, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, is while COVID is a health emergency at its core, right? And is, we want it, the first port of call of IRC is to make sure that we are responding to the virus itself. We're stopping the spread and we're treating those that have fallen ill. What I want to emphasize is the sort of other side of COVID, and what we learned a lot from the Ebola in West Africa was that what will likely harm the populations and the refugees and that we serve more will be ultimately the ricochet effects of COVID and the lockdown, and what that means in terms of accessing jobs and food and income. And if we think about this from the perspective, I'm an American in New York. When we started the lockdown, the first thing I did was I went out to the grocery store, took my savings, got some cash, went and bought all the food I could possibly think of. I paid my rent, my utility bills. Refugees and the vulnerable populations we serve do not have that extra cushion and often rely on daily wages to meet the immediate needs. And so what we wanted to make sure right away is, again, back to that, getting cash in the hands, like in the US we did, of those who need it most, of the refugees we serve, so that they were able to secure themselves pre-lockdown, to be able to have enough food, and to be able to sort of, in some cases, even start to grow their own food or access sort of, supermarkets and value chains. We also wanted to make sure that we were supporting local businesses to continue to serve the populations we serve as well. So providing cash in that instance as well. And I think while the health needs are huge, we are continually worried about the food security and sort of the food shortages and the access to food that will happen. I think the World Food Program and the United Nations just put out statistics that they said they think hunger will likely double as a result of COVID itself. And so just really putting in all those measures in place to make sure the refugees and vulnerable populations have what they need to survive the lockdowns. And then really quickly, how are we pivoting livelihoods and jobs and support structures to gain back regular income? What will the workforce look like? What types of support will refugees and the most vulnerable need as lockdowns start to loosen? And how do we make sure that people can quickly, regularly earn an income as well?
But this must have been a significant challenge for you, because you're really departing from long-term program to build jobs and livelihoods to actually short-term humanitarian assistance. How do you make that work? How do you finance that? How do you get your people to suddenly do something very different than they normally used to?
Yep. Why I have worked at the International Rescue Committee for so long, and the fabulous teams and country programs that I'm able to work with, is what's fantastic about our programming is that we really try and stretch. And this is really important for people to understand, that there are often sort of donors that just focus on humanitarian needs, and then there are donors that focus on the long term, and partners and organizations who do either or, and rarely the two meet. And so what IRC really does is try and stretch across what we call the arc of a crisis. And so being able to have flexible programming that responds to ongoing immediate humanitarian needs, as well as then sets refugees and vulnerable populations up for success in the long term. And so we were lucky enough to have systems in place, like for instance, in our Uganda program, which is another country the IKEA Foundation is working with us on, we had both emergency cash responses that were already running for sort of internally displaced and refugee populations, as well as longer term programming. And so our staff were able to pivot very quickly to deliver cash. We also approached our donors who fund our longer term programs, like the IKEA Foundation, and said, look, here's what we're going to need to do. We want to continue to reach the outcomes that we set together and with our clients around livelihoods. But to do that, and to make sure that our clients don't start from scratch once this is all over and are really in a worse off situation, we want to pivot some of that money, or even access additional money, to be able to distribute quick cash in the hands of our clients so that they're safe, protected, can eat. And when we're ready, go back to our programming that we set out and start to build livelihoods again. And so this working across this sort of emergency and longer term divide is something that cannot be stressed enough, of coordination and collaboration and being able to flex, because with climate change and with COVID and with everything, we know situations of people change on the drop of a hat. And so we want to meet our clients with the needs they need now, as well as plan for later.
Yeah, it's very interesting when one talks to people in sub-Saharan African countries and about the situation under COVID. It's so different to what we are used to in New York or London or wherever we live in Europe. We're focused on the health side of it, the people dying and of course people losing jobs. But if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, it's a very different situation. People are focused on getting something to eat. They're focused on what can we do. We lost our jobs. The borders are closed, so supplies are not coming in, and so on and so forth. So it's a very different perspective right now. It might change, but it's a very different perspective right now. And I think it's fascinating that you are able to pivot like you do to just meet the needs short term and longer term.
Exactly.
So humanitarian and development organizations, and you talked about the nexus, and that's a whole different discussion that we could have. Because we as a foundation believe very strongly in putting more money into helping people help themselves. So you could actually invest in people's future, which is what we do with you. But the humanitarian development organization often been criticized for being too top down in how they provide assistance to vulnerable groups, right? In the private sector, we put a lot of emphasis on understanding our customers, and we do customer research and when I look at what IKEA does to be successful, there's a lot of that happening. And we make the customers part of the solutions. So I'd like to know, how do you ensure that that refugees are included in creating solutions that actually work for them? Yep. And how do you interact with refugee-led organizations?
Yep. Great question, and extremely timely to really talk about how we meet the demands and needs of the clients we serve themselves, and try as we might to be, as less top down as possible. I think this is where IKEA Foundation has really led on this and pushed a lot of agencies like the International Rescue Committee to do better, to serve the communities and to listen to communities. And the Billy Project is a great example of this. I'll also just start by sort of saying IRC went under a strategy process when David Miliband, our now CEO of a long time now, came on board, where we focused really on what are the things that IRC needs to do to be outcomes driven for our clients, to meet their needs, and evidence-based, building on what we know and then generating more evidence on what can work. And one of the key strategic objectives that we outlined we need to do better on and we need to work more on is what we're calling client voice and choice, or client responsiveness. And thanks to sort of IKEA support for really pioneering this with our Billy Project, is designing and providing resources and time to design out constant feedback loops from clients, constant sort of periods of time where we could do design work with our clients. And the Billy Project has dedicated staff on hand in the livelihood resource centers, just there to make sure that clients feel safe to say this service worked well, this service didn't work well. We have different strategies of doing that: mobile phone texts, in person, sort of feedback boxes all around the office. And so really ensuring that we are changing services as needed, adjusting services, we're designing services with the client in mind, very much like the private sector does. And so additionally, what I was describing in the livelihood resource centers, what's so great about them is there used to be, when I first started at IRC, a lot of focus on just providing one pathway, right? We're just going to do vocational training for these clients. We're just going to do business grants for these clients. What the Livelihoods Resource Center model that Billy has sort of pioneered has allowed us to give, in the intake process, say, what services do you want? Do you just want legal counseling because you're trying to access a work permit? Do you want to start your own business and need training and a grant? Do you want to do an apprenticeship in this particular area? So really putting the power in the hands of the client to say what services they want. And the IKEA Foundation has given us the flexible funding to be able to move people throughout pathways without just saying, no, everyone has to do this pathway. What's also important is, I think, what we're able to do in the Billy model as well, and what you mentioned about sort of community and refugee-led organizations, is IRC, especially in places like Kenya and Uganda, where we work with IKEA Foundation, it's important for us to, we are a sort of American organization. And so it's important for us to work with local organizations that know the context better and to provide as much capacity and support for them to deliver services as well. And so our Billy model has both IRC delivery of services and also partner delivery of services so that we can reach the most clients possible. And yeah, that's sort of, we're trying to push as much direct service delivery to our partners on the ground as possible. Another sort of key component of this, if we go back to the urban piece, is the direct engagement and support for municipalities and city governments to be able to also support service delivery for refugee and host community populations. We've done, and I know this is a very important piece of work that IKEA Foundation and IRC are launching together in Uganda and Kenya, of how are we engaging municipalities to be service providers, to support policies. Often we find that sort of mayors and city council members are the best advocates for refugees, even when national policies say, aren't as welcoming. And so not just local community-led and refugee-led organizations, but how are we engaging city governments that we're building their systems to be able to support refugees as well?
Yeah, because they're also the ones providing refugees the right to work, right?
Exactly.
Which is not always a given, which is often a significant barrier.
Yep.
IKEA Foundation's refugee focus today is all about creating livelihoods and moving refugees towards self-reliance. That's where we have our focus. And in some cases, this will be through entrepreneurship initiatives. In other cases, it's about finding employment opportunities.
Yep.
Now, the IKEA retail operations around the world have embarked on a refugee internship program, which is quite interesting, and that helped thousands of refugees get a new start in the countries where IKEA is present. But the foundation is, as you know, it's focused on the large refugee hosting countries where we find the most refugees in the world, where the company is not present. And that's why we collaborate with organizations such as you. Can you explain to me how IRC is collaborating with the local private sector to create opportunities for refugees?
Great. And I think definitely as a part of sort of those pieces of the puzzle, right? The local refugee-led organizations, the municipalities and national governments, and then the other huge piece is this private sector piece, especially for the programs that my team and our country programs work on. You can't have a good income earning jobs employment program without engaging private sector, right? And this means doing really important market analysis with the private sector to see what sectors have space for employment, or what products and services are in demand for new enterprise. And so the first port of call is really engaging local market actors, local private sector, in understanding where refugees and vulnerable populations can best have opportunities. I was able to work on a program, actually, which sort of the Billy program emerged out of a ways back, around what we called micro franchise. And so this is the idea where we take a good product or service and bring it down to a sort of smaller level. And what this and it was specifically for young people, right? So often what stands in the way for young people is having a business idea, right? Like, this is hard. A lot of businesses fail, even in the US. And so what we said is, look, there are these companies that locally want to enter into new markets. And so why don't we use have young refugees and young vulnerable populations take these business models and products and services and help these businesses do last mile delivery or enter into new markets. And so we worked really closely in Kenya with an amazing regional company called Kenchick, which is like the Kentucky Fried Chicken of Kenya, and in another amazing regional company called Darling, which is the hair salon and distributor. And both of those companies did not have reach or sort of a customer base in the communities where we were working. And so we were able to get young people to franchise their operations. And it was a great partnership because IRC was able to help the businesses manage the risk that might come with what people think of more risky populations. And IRC was able to train and support and provide some resources for the refugees and young people. And the businesses were able to get build their business models, do training exactly the way they wanted. And in conversations with a lot of the businesses, they were like, number one, this is fantastic because we're getting more products and services. But number two, it's great sort of PR and marketing. These young people are the best brand ambassadors we could ask for. And so it's building these mutually beneficial, like win-wins for everyone, right? Like it eliminated the challenges young people face in starting a business. IRC helped to make the sort of matchmake and eliminate the risk. And the businesses benefited from, doing some corporate social responsibility work, but mostly doing better for their business. And so we seek to create partnerships at local and regional level. I want to emphasize that this is now more important than ever, especially when we're talking about food and hunger issues that are going to plague. It's going to be really important for us to work with our clients who are trying to find work and with our clients who are smallholder farmers to be able to link with regional and local food supply value chains. And we have an opportunity to really start to build those relationships that will help limit the impact of hunger and other things. So there's so many, while COVID has been, will be disastrous, I think we can use some of that opportunity to build some more of these private, public and sort of client partnerships. Yeah.
I think you're pointing to something really essential, and that is that you work with businesses to create a business opportunity. So this is not about charity, it's not about CSR. It's about something that is substantial, is profitable, and therefore it can be scaled. And
right.
That's the kind of relationships that you want to build.
Right.
What have you faced as the most significant challenge in building productive relationships with the private sector?
So our biggest challenge is this takes a while, right? So to design out those franchise models or to make, we're working with another fantastic sort of sub-Saharan Africa-based fertilizer company to develop some products and services with our clients. These relationships took sort of years long to build and to build out those models, right? To that work for the business, that work for the refugee, and that ultimately IRC can sort of remove itself from at some point, right? And those are multiple conversations, and often sort of donors donors, they want to see results very quickly. And in building out these business models take a long time. So it's trying to manage how long that takes and the resource intense that takes with expectations of our donors, of our clients, even where it takes longer as well. And so I think, and then the other is, which IKEA Foundation has been a leader on, is because this takes a while, what's best is multi-year funding, right? So often, a lot of our funding is sort of 6 months or 1 year in emergencies, but to build out these business models, you need a multi-year. And this, again, our Billy project in IKEA Foundation, which is running 5 years, is a perfect example of the time and space to be able to do this.
Yeah, the year-by-year funding that we see a lot in your sector is really limited in terms of being able to create longer-term results. And it takes years for the private sector and businesses to build up successful business opportunities. So why should it take less time to do what we are doing? I mean, it makes no sense. So I'm glad you have those opportunities and that you see the opportunities that exist with the private sector. I think, again, I guess you probably figure out that you have to go with the ones who really want to take risk and are interested in making an impact beyond just making money, but really wanting to see how they expand their business and at the same time do good in society. I was going to ask you, we talk about building businesses, and part of what we do is, of course, create entrepreneurship opportunities and supporting refugees become successful entrepreneurs. And sometimes the only thing a refugee needs to start a business is access to cash, right? Access to financial services, and which is not a given in those countries anyway, and certainly not for refugees who are often prevented from these kind of services, such as access to microfinance, for example. And this is very difficult for refugees because they have no credit history and they have no collateral to put up. Right? You talked about how you provide cash grants to refugees at an early stage to actually give them the basics that they need when they arrive and have nothing. But can you tell us a little bit about how cash grants play a role in setting up businesses and helping refugees become successful entrepreneurs?
Yep. So what we've seen is often the biggest, like you outlined, Per, so eloquently, the biggest barrier is often that first injection of cash. And for refugees and vulnerable populations, it is almost impossible to access a loan. I mean, I've had a job at IRC for 15 years. I was trying to buy a house, and accessing a loan for me was difficult. Imagine the sort of collateral and all the things you mentioned. I want to highlight one of our Billy clients who I adore, and who you guys will be highlighting for World Refugee Day as well. Eve. So she's a refugee from Congo, and had come over, first ended up in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya when she first arrived, but then realized very limited opportunity there, and moved to Nairobi. And so she was able to then, through advertisement by UNHCR and others, come across our Billy project there and enter the Livelihoods Resource Center opportunities. She specifically had a good set of sort of dressmaking and pattern making skills that she brought with her, and very much just needed that injection of capital to be able to do something. So we were able to help her develop a very specific business plan, as well as give her whatever was needed to get started, that cash grant, which I also want to point out in terms of when I was talking about evidence building and using research, the business cash grant, as far as we know now, is the sort of most effective way to support employment, actual injection of cash for refugees. So she was able to get that cash, open her own dressmaking and pattern making business. And she was really focused on selling like Africana wear, bags, shoes, like really, really cute stuff that a lot of our IRC staff ended up buying. And when COVID hit, which I think is like another thing we want to bring out, she was able, with sort of some support and guidance and counseling from our Livelihood Center staff, to say, you know what, I'm going to pivot to mask making, right? And so I'm going to take that same Africana patterns I was working on, develop mask making, and sort of give them sell them at fair and reasonable prices to local community members, but also other suppliers and whatever else. And so there'll be a sort of video of her coming down the pike, but she really wanted to emphasize that it was important for her to both continue her business, but also pivot to make sure that not only she was responding to the market, but also contributing back to like the country that has hosted her, with the things that are needed for the virus. And so that's just a quick snapshot of sort of, she's a mother of 3. She's been able to sort of pay for school fees. She's been able to provide for her family, and both the business plan and the pivot she was able to do, and the sort of flexible money she had, were really important.
It is fascinating and very humbling when I join you in the Billet program and go around and see the refugees and what they've been able to achieve, the entrepreneurship, the creativity, the positive view on the world, this progressive approach to we can make it work, and knowing that how difficult it is for them compared to anyone else, and still they prevail and they are successful. And it just shows you that refugees are, as I said in the beginning, people like you and me, and some of them are just extraordinary. And I'm so glad that we have together the opportunity to provide the platform that they need to actually get started, and maybe also then start providing jobs for others and build
Yep.
their business and scale it, which is a different story. So scaling is probably also linked to financial services. So cash grant is one thing that comes from you, but how do you work to link refugees to financial services, enable them to access what everyone else can access automatically?
Yeah, so this is another really good example of like where the private sector is so important to success of refugee entrepreneurship and employment. And so we've been working throughout the years with a range of local, regional, global financial institutions, right? Microfinance institutions, local banks, and have found fantastic partners who are willing to design specific products and services that meet the needs of the most vulnerable. And again, this is where INGOs and non-governmental organizations like IRC can really play this role of risk mitigator. When I used to work in our country program in Sierra Leone, we also had a micro franchise project there and worked with a local bank in a town called Kenema to be able to set up savings accounts. And because IRC staff and myself were able to sit down with the local bank, we were able to say, look, you usually make it so people have to have at least $100 in their savings account to keep it open. If IRC sort of says we'll be providing ongoing support and check-ins and resources to these clients, will you be willing to waive that minimum balance fee? And they were, and then we were able to sort of get savings accounts, which then can eventually lead to access to loans. Another key part of this is really comes at the policy and sort of national government level, and a lot of work that UNHCR and other partners are doing around documentation. And so it's super important, right? To open a bank account in the US, you need an ID, right? And so how are we ensuring that refugees understand their legal rights and have the right documentation for a range of reasons, one of which also being financial services? And so our Billy project and our Livelihoods Resource Center also has access to legal counseling and referrals to ensure right documentation. The other example I'll just give really quickly is, listen, as you've discussed, right, like refugees are like us, but also have unlimited grit and resilience. And so how are we building on their existing strategies to also layer products and services? And so one of the existing strategies that IRC tries to build on is what we call village savings and loan associations, or community savings groups, or community banks. And so it's this idea that people have already developed informal ways to save in groups. And so how are we leveraging the history of repayment and loans in those groups to then be a credit history? And so we're working with a lot of digital companies to say, how can we keep digital records of these savings and loan things that refugees are already doing, so that it can serve as a credit history, so that they can access bank accounts. So there's a lot you can build on, and then there's a lot that you can sort of help get the private sector to work with you on further development. And so that's what we're trying to do. And again, pair, like anything else, this takes time as well. And so
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's brilliant, really. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. Mohammed has asked the following. He says, learning from current circumstances, do you think remote work and collaboration can be something that may support deployment and empowerment of a refugee workforce?
Yeah, I think so. We've been talking a lot about, thanks for your question, Mohammed. It's on our minds right now as well. Prior to COVID, we had done a few pilots in our Jordan program with vulnerable Jordanians and Syrian refugees around what we call like business process outsourcing or digital work. And ultimately, we also looked at how this could support sort of some more of our vulnerable populations who aren't really allowed to leave the home or have childcare duties to do some remote work here and there. And so what we really want to think about now, and back to that sort of like market analysis, is likely more jobs will become digital, will become able to do from the home, which could serve our female clients really well. And so how are we supporting refugee skills to adapt? The one thing I want to flag with sort of that digital conversation is access, right? So as you can imagine, right, like it's easy, I'm on my internet at home, no problem. access to smartphones and access to internet for our populations is difficult. And so when we design jobs programs that we want to sort of get into the digital game, important to also think about the access to bandwidth and internet and the skills needed for that. But I do think there's some real opportunity here with sort of digital skills, working from home, working remotely, that present an opportunity for refugees. I want to make sure they're safe, that they're well, they're paid fairly, and so all those things that come along with it. But huge opportunity, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a comment from and this is going to be difficult for you, but it's from Flasia Nyamu. And she says, my experience with refugee programs is acceptance of refugees and socialization with refugees by the host community creates social economic opportunities supported by host community and refugees.
Yep.
So she's really supportive of that. Patricia has asked us another question. She says, during these times like these, children from disadvantaged communities are usually left behind when it comes to education. And this happened, for instance, in Romania, where poor children do not have access to technology and online education. Do you have plans to support initiatives that address such issues on education for such situations?
Yes, I am a small part of the IRC family and the IRC work. When I was talking about our strategy a little bit ago, we have 5 key outcomes that we want to support for our clients, right? The one that I work in is ensuring our clients are economically well, are able to benefit, earn an income, meet their basic needs. There's health outcomes. We want to make sure our clients are healthy. There are sort of safety. We want to make sure our clients are safe. There's a power outcome. We want to make sure our clients have power. And the final outcome is education. And so there are counterparts that, to me, that are working on a range of education programs from early childhood development all the way through to, and this is where it works with, or links with my team's work, all the way through to sort of job access. And so they've been doing a ton of pivoting recently as a response to COVID around digital learning, homeschooling, ensuring access, supporting curriculum development, making sure that children who are already sort of left behind, right? Refugees often suffer from missing school, are not further left behind in COVID. And we have a history, some really great partnerships with the MacArthur Foundation and Sesame Street and Lego Foundation and other great colleagues of PAIRS in supporting access to education for the most vulnerable. And there's a really cool element to that they really focus on around social emotional learning. We know that refugees and vulnerable populations face a lot of trauma, especially children. And so how are we ensuring classrooms or virtual learning spaces are safe and are responding to the social emotional needs as well? So definitely agree. It's very important.
So we have another comment from Hilda. And Hilda says that after COVID, we have seen how interconnected we are.
Yep.
The business of the future should be social entrepreneurs. Nothing wrong with making a big profit, but also looking at business holistically, environment and social impacts. And I think we can all agree with that.
Yep.
Barry, finally, if you could make one change that would significantly improve your ability to create sustainable opportunities for refugees, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, one. I mean, I think the sort of overarching one for me over these past few months has been how horrible COVID and the likelihoods of the effects that we'll see from lockdowns, we're not even there yet, but also how can we use this time, this COVID horribleness, as an opportunity to think about shifting power dynamics, shifting business opportunities to the clients that we serve. So that's the sort of frame for me. The one thing that I would really just focus on is what IKEA Foundation has done so well, right? This multi-year, long-term, but ability to pivot to respond to the needs of our clients. We cannot design good programming or with and for our clients if we do not have a runway and the flexibility to pivot to their needs. If all we have are sort of funding and donors that say, just this narrow thing at this time and that's it, we're not being very client responsive, right? So again, this is where Per, your team is a leader on this, of just this flexible multi-year ability to design these really important, but tough programs. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'll just thank an expert, Barry, and I mean, with your passion and with the organization you have in the back, and your focus on the future and on constant improvement and development and innovation, nothing can go wrong. We can just see that this is an opportunity for refugees in the future to work with you and create opportunities, and then create the opportunities for others. And then we certainly will see a different world where refugees and host community are integrated, and when refugees become an opportunity and an integrated opportunity in society, as opposed to being seen as a problem. So thank you so much for your time today.
For your leadership, and for we are just so ever grateful for the IKEA Foundation's partnership. Yeah.
And we're grateful for your passion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I want to thank you both. It was a fantastic discussion. I always get so inspired hearing about this. And, I've had a chance to talk to you, Barry, before, and a few people in IRC, and actually incredible to see the work that you guys do. So thank you so much. It's such a big topic, but I think I always go back to what Per says, refugees are exactly the same as you and me. And I think that's such a key message and such an important thing to remember as we lead up to World Refugee Day on the 20th of June this year. So I hope those who are watching will take a few minutes and help to share some of these messages that we're sharing with you, share some of the messages that other refugee organizations are sharing, and really help us change the narrative around refugees this June and always, and keep that discussion going. So thank you so much. We will have more Ask an Expert sessions around refugees as we get closer to World Refugee Day, as well as some more content coming through the IKEA Foundation social media channels. So please keep an eye on that. With that, a big thank you again. And I think we'll say goodbye. And also a huge thank you to all the people who sent these great questions and feedback through social media. It's incredible to hear that, and great to see the passion from our audience and to be able to engage with you guys a little bit. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye, thank you.